By the fourth week of their partnership, Book and Crumb, as customers had spontaneously dubbed their collaboration, had developed a small but loyal following. Eliza's baking counter now featured a handwritten waiting list for her Friday chocolate babka, and several local businesses had begun ordering pastry platters for meetings. More importantly, Eliza had begun to feel a sense of belonging. Mrs. Hargrove invited her to join the Harbor Book Club. The local farmers started setting aside prime ingredients for her. Even the town's most notorious gossip, Beverly Whittaker, had grudgingly admitted that Eliza's apple galette was acceptable. But it was her evolving relationship with Julian that transformed her days from merely improved to joyful. Their casual touches had become more frequent, a hand at the small of her back as he passed behind her, their fingers brushing as they exchanged books and pastries, shoulders touching as they closed up shop together. They'd fallen into the habit of evening walks along the harbor, sometimes talking for hours, other times comfortable in shared silence. Last night, he'd finally kissed her properly beneath the lighthouse, his lips tasting of sea salt and possibility. Now, as June sunshine streamed through the bookstore windows, Eliza hummed while preparing dough for tomorrow's pastries. The bell above the door jingled, and Julian appeared with a bouquet of wildflowers. "These reminded me of you," he said, cheeks flushing slightly. "Resilient things growing in unlikely places." Eliza accepted them with a smile that faltered when she noticed his serious expression. "What's wrong?" Julian ran a hand through his hair, his nervous tell. "Beverly Whittaker came in earlier. She mentioned hearing rumors about your time in Boston." Eliza's stomach dropped. She'd known this moment would come, had dreaded it even as their relationship deepened. Setting the flowers aside, she wiped her hands on her apron. "I should have told you everything sooner," she whispered. I was afraid of how you'd look at me afterward." Julian took her flour-dusted hands in his. "Nothing could change how I see you, Eliza." Her voice trembled as she finally shared the full story. How, as head pastry chef at Bellingham's, Boston's most exclusive patisserie, she discovered the owner systematically stealing staff tips. When she'd confronted him, he'd framed her for theft, using his influence to blackball her throughout the city's culinary circles. "I had evidence," she explained, tears tracking down her cheeks. "But his connections were too strong. No one would listen, so I left, tried restaurants in Providence, then Portland. But his reach was long. Eventually, I wound up here, thinking a small town might be far enough." She looked up, expecting disappointment or doubt in Julian's eyes. Instead, she found fierce protectiveness that stole her breath. "I was right about you from the start," he said quietly. "Even in your silence, your integrity shone through." He pulled her close, one hand cradling the back of her head as she pressed her face against his shoulder. "You're not alone in this anymore," he murmured into her hair. When she finally drew back, Julian cupped her face in his hands. "Now it's my turn for revelations." He led her to the small apartment above the bookstore where he lived, making tea before retrieving a worn portfolio from his desk. Inside were architectural drawings, beautiful, innovative designs for structures that blended seamlessly with their natural surroundings. "Before the bookstore, I was a rising architect in Chicago," he explained. "Married to my college sweetheart, Sophia, who was also my business partner." His expression clouded. "She left with my best friend and half my clients. The firm collapsed. I came here to start over, bought this place with the last of my savings." Eliza traced one of the drawings with gentle fingers. "These are extraordinary, Julian." "I haven't designed anything in 3 years," he admitted. "Until last week." He pulled out a final sketch. A small, charming building with a bookstore on one side and a bakery on the other, connected by a glass-roofed courtyard cafe. "It's just a daydream," he said softly. "But for the first time since everything fell apart, I'm imagining futures again." The intensity of his gaze left no doubt about who had inspired this renewal. Eliza's heart raced as Julian leaned forward, his kiss deeper and more certain than the night before, filled with understanding and promise. That evening, as summer twilight lingered, they made love for the first time in his apartment above the bookstore, the lighthouse beam sweeping rhythmically across the ceiling, their shared vulnerabilities transformed into strength. Afterward, lying in the tangle of sheets, Julian traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "We're quite the pair, aren't we? Both running from pasts we didn't deserve." Eliza smiled, feeling truly safe for the first time in years. Maybe we weren't running from something, but toward each other. The conversion of the small storage room into a functional baking space took 3 weeks. Julian had insisted on covering the costs, brushing off Eliza's protests with a casual wave of his hand. "Consider it an investment in both our futures," he'd said, eyes twinkling with something that made her stomach flutter. On opening day, Eliza arrived at dawn. The space was tiny, barely enough room for a commercial oven, a prep counter, and essential supplies, but it was hers. For the first time in months, she felt the weight of possibility rather than despair as she tied her apron strings. She decided on an ambitious first-day menu: lemon lavender scones, chocolate babka, rustic apple galettes, and her signature cardamom-spiced cinnamon rolls. As the aromas filled the bookstore, Julian appeared in the doorway, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. "This," he said, inhaling deeply, "is going to change everything." His confidence both warmed and terrified her. Everything could still go wrong. When the first customers arrived, their eyes widened at the display of pastries, but Eliza noticed the hesitation, the whispered exchanges. "Is she the one who?" "I heard that in Boston, she." Julian stepped in smoothly. "Have you tried Eliza's cinnamon rolls? They're extraordinary. First-time customers get one half price with any book purchase." By mid-morning, sales were slow but steady. Mrs. Hargrove, the town's librarian, took a tentative bite of a scone and couldn't conceal her delight. "My goodness," she exclaimed. "That's rather wonderful." Others gradually followed suit. Not everyone was convinced. Eliza caught the sideways glances, the deliberate avoidance of her counter by certain townspeople. But enough customers returned for seconds that hope began to bloom. As they closed that evening, Julian helped her clean up, their movements forming an easy rhythm as if they'd worked together for years rather than hours. 17 pastries sold, Eliza sighed, wiping down the counter. Not exactly a roaring success. Julian looked up from sweeping. 17 first impressions changed. 17 opportunities to build a reputation on your actual talents rather than rumors. I'd call that a remarkable beginning. Their eyes met across the small space, and something electric passed between them. Julian stepped closer, reaching out to brush a smudge of flour from her cheek. His touch lingered seconds longer than necessary. "Why are you doing all this for me?" Eliza whispered, suddenly aware of how close they stood. "You barely know me." Julian set the broom aside. "Maybe I'm just a sucker for underdogs, or maybe—" his voice dropped lower. "Maybe I recognized something in you that first day, a determination that matches my own." He leaned against the counter. "After my divorce 3 years ago, this whole town had opinions. The failed marriage, the bookstore that barely breaks even, plenty thought I should sell out, move to Portland, get a real job." His expression softened. "But some things are worth fighting for, even when everyone else thinks you're making a mistake." The vulnerability in his admission cracked something open inside Eliza. That night, as they walked along the harbor after closing, the lighthouse beam sweeping over darkened waters, she found herself telling him about Boston. Not everything, not yet, but enough that the burden she carried lightened just a little. When their hands brushed accidentally, neither pulled away. Instead, their fingers interlaced, tentatively at first, then with quiet certainty. They walked in comfortable silence, the warmth of connection more eloquent than words. Later, standing on her cottage porch, Julian lifted their still-joined hands and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Until tomorrow, Eliza Bennett." As she watched him walk away, Eliza realized that for the first time in months, she was looking forward to tomorrow, and all the tomorrows that might follow. The scent of vanilla and cinnamon clung to Eliza's fingers as she straightened her resume for the 5th time that week. Outside the window of her rented cottage, Seabreeze Harbor's lighthouse beam swept across the darkening horizon, a rhythm as steady as her mounting rejections. "I'm sorry, Miss Bennett," the cafe owner had said earlier, avoiding her eyes. "We've just filled the position." Eliza knew better. The help wanted sign remained in the window as she'd walked away, her shoulders tight with familiar disappointment. Word traveled fast in small towns, and somehow her reputation had arrived before her. 3 years of culinary school and 5 years at prestigious bakeries in Boston meant nothing once people heard the whispers. She'd moved to this coastal Maine town hopping for anonymity, for a chance to start fresh. But 6 weeks in, every bakery, restaurant, and cafe had turned her away with the same tight smiles and flimsy excuses. Pulling her cardigan tighter against the autumn chill, Eliza decided to explore the town's small independent bookstore she'd noticed tucked between a hardware shop and a maritime museum. Books had always been her comfort, recipes her religion. If she couldn't bake professionally, at least she could find new cookbooks to experiment with in her tiny rented kitchen. Bells chimed softly as she pushed open the weathered blue door of Lighthouse Pages. The scent of old paper and coffee enveloped her, and for the first time that day, her shoulders relaxed. "Be with you in a moment," called a deep voice from somewhere behind a towering shelf. Eliza wandered toward the cooking section, fingers trailing along the spines. She was so absorbed in a French pastry book that she didn't notice someone approach until a shadow fell across the page. "That's one of my favorites," said the voice from earlier. "The author's technique for croissants is revolutionary." She looked up into eyes the color of dark honey, set in a face framed by disheveled brown hair. The man wore a cable-knit sweater with elbow patches and reading glasses perched atop his head. "I'm Julian Parker," he said, extending his hand. "Owner, operator, and occasionally janitor of this literary establishment." "Eliza Bennet," she replied, accepting his handshake with hesitation, waiting for the flicker of recognition, the subtle withdrawal she'd grown accustomed to. It never came. Instead, his smile widened. Any relation to Elizabeth Bennet of Pride and Prejudice? Despite herself, Eliza laughed. "My mother was an English teacher with a Jane Austen obsession." "Well, Eliza Bennet, what brings you to our little corner of the coast?" The genuine warmth in his voice loosened something in her chest. "A fresh start," she said simply. As they talked between the bookshelves, Eliza found herself revealing more than she'd intended. Her culinary training, her love of experimental baking, even her struggle to find work locally. She carefully omitted why. "Wait," Julian said, eyes widening. "You're telling me none of our local establishments have snapped you up? Their loss." He paused, running a hand through his already tousled hair. "This might sound strange, but I've been thinking about offering coffee and pastries here. Nothing fancy, just something to encourage people to linger among the books." Their eyes met, and an unexpected spark passed between them. "Would you be interested in a collaboration?" Julian asked, his voice softening. "The storage room in back could be converted. It's small, but it has water access, and I could get a proper oven installed." Eliza's heart raced with both hope and suspicion. "You don't even know me. Why would you offer something like that?" Julian leaned against the bookshelf, considering her with a thoughtfulness that made her feel truly seen for the first time in months. "Let's just say I know what it's like to need a second chance," he replied. "Besides, I've been told I'm an excellent judge of character." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "And I have a feeling about you, Eliza Bennet, a very good feeling indeed."